Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my next guest, Mr. Rishad Tobacowala. You know, Rashad is such a great friend, and he just never ceases to surprise me of the incredible goings-on between those two ears of his. So much so that in February, it was a Sunday morning, it was a really warm day in February, and I was just enjoying a nice Sunday morning when bing, in came an email from Rashad, his newsletter that drops every Sunday morning. I read it. It was so unbelievable, and it was characteristic of basically every other newsletter that I get from him, that I decided to acknowledge it with a little video.
Every Sunday morning, I receive a gift of knowledge and insight based on decades of experience and a whole bunch of gray matter. A perspective through which to comprehend a complex and dynamic world. A gift of foresight into an uncertain future. Who's the giver, you ask? He's the Midas of the Midwest, the Oracle of Illinois, the sage of Second City, but his view is global. He is Rishad Tobacowala. And he shares his perspectives free of charge in his weekly newsletter. Read it, contemplate it, apply it, profit from it.
I certainly do, and highly recommend that you do the same. Rashad, as I mentioned to you about a half an hour ago, I applied a very tried and true preparation methodology for this discussion. I did absolutely fuck all. No preparation, because we're going to have a conversation. It's great to see you.
Likewise, thanks for inviting me. As a unemployed, starving author, it's great to be
Well, unemployed, starving author, let's talk about that. You seem to have very successfully adopted a sort of post-career portfolio career, you know, a la Rob Norman, a la Minardo Donardis, folks that, you know, had a day job and then converted it into a whole panoply of things. And I think this is kind of a theme that fits into your thesis that we're going to talk about in terms of rethinking work. How do you like portfolio life?
It's very good, and you know, it's different than Rob and Minardo that they do real work. They have real boards, real things. I don't do those. Because I wanted to basically have a second career where I had no bosses, no employees, no P&L, and nobody reporting to me. And that's what I've pulled out.
Don't we all wish we had that?
So I figured that out, and I figured out a way to do it in a way that I still work with the place I worked for 37 years.
So let's list. You do any number of things. You have a podcast, you have a newsletter, you speak, you consult. Walk us through the portfolio.
So this will sound much more strategic than it is, because it's 4 years after I've been doing it. So I just do one thing. I help people see, think, and feel differently about how to grow themselves, their teams, or their business. And I go to market in 3 ways. As you know, I like 3.
Everything's in 3s, yeah.
So one is one to many, one is one to some, and one is one to one. Under one to many, I have my book, Restoring the Soul of Business. I have my Substack, which is at rishad.substack.com. And then I have my podcast, which is called What Next, which you've been a guest on.
Yep.
So that's my one to many. I have one to some, which is keynotes, executive offsites, and workshops. And then I have my one to one, which is large company advisory, private equity, and startups. And the first one is supposed to give you accelerated insights. So I say, give me 6 minutes, I'll teach you something on a Sunday. The second one is actionable inspiration, which is how do you actually move your business, but with different teams. And the last one is hopefully augmented intelligence, that I add intelligence to you and your team if possible. So that's what I do, and it's one person.
One person, no employees?
No employees, no staff. I have a book agent, because you have to do that to get book deals, right. But all by myself.
And no higher body that you report to other than Mrs. Tobaccowala.
Yes, and the ladies Tobaccowala, so three of them.
So I find it, fascinating, this idea of you know what it sounds a lot like? Freedom.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, because my definition of success is freedom to spend time in the ways that give you joy. That's it.
Very good. So, yes, that warrants applause. So, you're often prognosticating about the future. Talk to me about accountability. Like, when do you look back at your predictions that you made 5 years ago, reassess, readjust? What's your internal process for holding yourself accountable?
Well, there are two ways of doing it. One is I look back continuously because people sort of ask me, because while I am working by myself, I'm actually plugging and playing in with lots of different firms and companies, so I really don't do it by myself. And I'm also fortunate that, because probably of my past, I get to a lot of very senior people at boardrooms, large companies, small companies, probably at a much greater frequency than I did even when I was one of the top 5 people in a 100,000 person company. And they obviously have done research, so they ask me about that, so I have to constantly benchmark. So, any given day, if I'm right about 70% of the time, that's great. On the long ones, 10 years ago, I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal of India. It's called The Economic Times, where I said 10 predictions for the next 10 years. I checked after 10 years. I had got all 10 right. Okay, so I've written my next 10, and we'll see if I'm alive of 10 from here.
I meant what I said in terms of, like, I read your newsletter, and I think about how it applies to my business, life, basically everything. And I find there's something I can pull out of the newsletter that actually applies, and I put it to work.
That's exactly right. Ernest Hemingway had said, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? I try to keep this to 6 minutes, and I spend 3.5 hours writing it, okay, for 6 minutes. And people say you're doing it, and it's free. There's no advertising, no affiliate marketing, no upselling, no data harvesting. The whole thing's a goddamn ad for me. But outside of that, okay, the reality of it is, because that's the way I now have, I've got hundreds of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, thousands of people reading me around the world, and it's completely free. And I basically say, okay. And what it is because I know, and the other thing is, you probably know, my audience isn't just all these like muckety mucks. It's students, it's young people.
Yep. And
it's all over the world. And they're hungry, and people are really hungry for someone to basically give them tools to get better. And I don't have the answer. I say, here are ways to think about it, because who the hell knows? If I had the answer, I wouldn't be unemployed.
Let's talk about your life as an author. 2 years ago, you wrote Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. Can you explain that title?
Yeah, so, I know a little bit about data. I have an advanced degree in mathematics. When I was at Publicis, I was sort of involved with some big acquisitions. So I have a little knowledge of the space. But what I began to realize is people were tilting too much towards it. And I worried that as math and machines became more powerful, and the last chapter of my book talks about all the stuff that we're now living in, that what would separate us was how we worked with machines and data, and not just machines and data. So I keep saying the future of branding is data-driven storytelling, but let's not forget the storytelling. And for a long time, your iceberg about efficiency and efficacy, my line for that is we have too much plumbing and not enough poetry. Okay, if you find the right person at the right place at the right time, you take your wife to, let's say, Venice on a moonlit night, and then you start talking about auto mechanic, it doesn't work. And my whole stuff, the better you target someone, the more you get pissed off if you don't give them the right interaction. And so my whole stuff was you have to combine the two. And I show category after category, company after company, that companies that combine the two do better. And underlying it, it's the underlying thing that we choose with our hearts, and we use numbers to justify what we just did.
So in theory, you're kind of aligned with Elon Musk, right? You want more poetry, which will lead to more procreation, and he's worried about not enough humans. So there you go.
Yeah, he's worried about not about humans, and to a great extent, in some ways he's correct, but there's a continent called Africa which will solve that.
Yeah. The browning of humanity, as I've heard you say. Let's talk about how was the experience being an author? I mean, the whole process of writing the book, having the book edited, all the logistics, and then, of course, the marketing and the tours. Having done it and done it successfully, what would you advice would you give to an aspiring author? Asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend, I would basically say after I went through the process, it was sort of like my wife mentioning to me after she just gave birth to our first daughter, never again. And I'm writing it again, and we did have a second daughter too. So the process is, if you do it the way I did it, which is I did it the hard way, which is I sold my book and got an advance from a major publisher before I started writing it. And I've done it again the second time the same way. So what you have to do is you got to put a book proposal together. I now have an agent, but then you got to go get an agent. You got to get interviewed by a bunch of people who interrogate you to see if you're good enough to write a book. Then you get a year to write the book. You have 6 to 7 months of line-by-line editing. And then I launched the book, and then it took off. It was great, and then we had COVID. So I had to figure out how to do that too. But it's fantastic because it's the closest I've come to, besides being the father of my daughters, to having made something.
Right. Even though, so you're doing another book, even though in today's agile world, I guess you have it all, right? You got the book, but you've got the weekly, you've got a lot of outlets in order to get more timely, shorter cadence topics.
Yeah, we've got timely, shorter cadence. We have a lot of different ways of doing it. But the reason for the book is I try to write, just like the thing in the Substack, if you notice, I've written 144 weeks in a row, so 144 Sundays.
Wow.
And now I have this page where I've organized the best 72 pieces, because a lot of executives say, I want to go back to it. You can read any one of mine for 144 weeks and you'll think I wrote it yesterday.
Right.
Okay, so one of the key things, reason why I'm having difficulty writing the current chapter I'm in my book, which is about technology at work, because everything I'm writing I know will be dated, because it's about AI and other stuff, and by the time the book comes out, there'll be ChatGPT or GPT-6, right, versus GPT-5 or GPT, which now we're at 4, which is sort of the thing I worry about. But otherwise, I'm trying to make things as evergreen as possible, so I'm trying to talk about things that hopefully will make sense 3-4 years from now versus just now.
My copy of Restoring
Soul of Business.
Restoring the Soul Business. It's earmarked. It's highlighted. It's like a reference piece for me.
It is, and one of the things is in February, I ended up doing a presentation at a little company in Cincinnati and a little company in Bentonville, beginning and end of the month. And all of them bought hundreds of books. And I said, it's a 3-year-old book. They said, no, it's absolutely exactly what's happening today.
Yep.
So I said, good. That's the key thing.
Rethinking work. What's the premise?
Rethinking work is the basic premise that that work is extremely important to everybody, regardless of whether you have money or you don't have money, right? And we work for 5 or 6 reasons, of which income happens to be a very important one. But the other reasons tend to be things like purpose, identity, meaning, growth. And what I began to realize was people were panicking. As you know, I've written a lot about return to the office and things like that. As people were panicking about what to do about bringing people back to the office or not bringing back people to the office, I said, you know what, that's not the real problem. The real problem is there are 6 big factors that are going to change work in the next 2 to 3 years. And if this is the one that's giving you a headache, you haven't seen anything at all. So I'll give you 3 so I basically go around and say why we work, where we work, who we work for, how we work, when we work. All of those are going to be dramatically changed in the next 3 years. And most boards, most organizations are not anywhere clear about what's about to happen. So I'll give you these are random statistics, but these are actually true because everything has to be if you publish it with McGraw-Hill, they check every number. But basically the key thing is 62% of Gen Z have a side hustle or side gig even if they have a full-time job, right? 10 to 15% of people have moved 50 miles from where they used to live before COVID. Most people don't realize that next year there'll be more freelancers in the United States than full-time workers. Okay? The entire notion of work is changing, and people don't realize it, and that's one of the key things I try to explain. You've got a guy who uses something that's a free piece of technology because I charge nothing for it, so Substack gets nothing, right? I use a free piece of technology sitting at home, and I reach more decision makers than Ad Age and Adweek combined.
Wow.
If you think scale matters, there's a lot of new scale, right? Yes, there's the scale of data and the scale of networks, but people are underestimating the scale of talent, the scale of influence. You know, we are underestimating how important that's going to be. And so a lot of the book is about that.
Let's talk about talent. 3 years ago, almost to the day, you and I, in the early days of the pandemic, did a webinar.
Yes.
And it was called Radical Candor. Because one of the things I appreciate about Rashad is he doesn't pull any punches, kind of like I try to live the way he does, which is just say it if you think it. And one of the things that we talked about was a phenomenon that we're just getting used to, which is in a world of remote work and all doing Zooms, we're all of a sudden collapsing the HR stack such that CEOs were kind of dealing with hands-on keyboard people and clients, and that's about it. And all of a sudden, you had this discovery of all these middle managers, people that shuffle the paper from one side of the table desk to the other, all of a sudden had like nothing to do in that world because there was no office to play politics in. And we nicknamed them Carl, if you recall. The example I said was, Carl, like we get off a Zoom and you're like, wait a second, what was Carl do? What did Carl contribute to that Zoom? Wait, what did Carl contribute before the pandemic? And the answer is, there's a lot of Carls in corporate America, and you and I speculated it could be up to 25% of Carls.
Yes, so what basically happens is that my belief is that at least 1 out of 2 jobs are fake.
Okay, so
Right.
we said 25%. You're saying 50%
I
are
believe that in
Carls.
most companies, 50% of the jobs are fake.
Elon Musk says 80% is
Right,
fake,
but-
right? Because
yeah.
he fired 80%. Or
Right, but it's about 50%. I'm not saying every company,
Right.
it's about 50%. And we actually end up doing shit, that is, we create work just to prove that. And the biggest thing that has happened to me, this is the one thing I do get to go to boards and very politely tell them that, because once upon a time I used to be like that, right? And I used to say, hey, listen, people are asking, what exactly do you do? Okay, besides managing, controlling, telling us and checking in, what have you built? What have you created? What do you actually do? Can you tell me what you do? And I ask everybody, take a day and tell me what you are actually making or creating and how much of the rest of the time are you paper processing. All that's gone. And when the machines come, and the machines are getting good, let me tell you, every time I write something in my book, I first do GPT-4 and I say, shit, I better, how do I beat this?
Yeah.
And you know, that's where we are.
So we got it wrong. Maybe 25 or 50 is wrong. What I love about, I don't like everything that Elon Musk is doing with Twitter, but the one thing that he sort of did teach the world is that you can think of talent composition from zero.
Yeah.
In other words, like not a 10% riff or 15% riff. No. Start with zero. Fire everyone at the company and add back the people who can correctly answer the question, what are you doing?
Yeah, so here's what I would do. I wouldn't figure firing everybody because it's very inhumane and it's a really horrible thing.
You should try it, by the way.
Yeah, no, just let me tell you, because I think, you know, for somebody, their career and their job is a big part of their identity, so I wouldn't do that. What I would do is try something else, because I just had on my most recent podcast, I had someone from Shopify, right? And they have a thing that they do. Toby Lutke does something called Chaos Monkey. So he did a Chaos Monkey in January, and the Chaos Monkey was all meetings are canceled. Everything is removed from everything. There are no meetings. If you want to have a meeting, you have to reinstate it and ask why you have it, who you have it. You need it to be 1 hour, 30 minutes, can it be done by email? At the end of 3 months, their productivity has increased 25%.
Right. it actually logically makes sense. Actually, another topic we talked about was this concept of zero-based calendaring, which is post-pandemic. Screw it, man. I'm not automatically going to this event and that event. No, you have to justify every use of time, every airplane ride. We all know this. We still take airplane rides. All you got to do is follow Dave Morgan on Twitter, and you know people take airplane rides. But the point is, now we're not just doing it reflexively, we're doing it with intentionality.
We're doing it with intentionality, and as Dave Morgan says, airplane rides are back too, but that's only second compared to New York is back.
Right.
But one of the key things I think that's very important, right? One of the things that's extremely important is, this is a key thing I would ask all of you all to do, with or without alcohol, with or without cannabis. Try this, okay? Get some of your team. And basically say, we're going to start again. We have nothing excepting any asset. We have all the assets in our company, all of our talent, all of our brands. If you want them, identify the client you're trying to solve for, a competitor you're trying to do, and say, okay, if I was a competitor, how would I destroy myself? If I was trying to solve this problem, how would I solve this problem? I have no constraints excepting 3. I can use any of the assets I want. My only 3 constraints are, it has to be legal and ethical, which are different things, but let's assume that's one. Number 2 is, it has to be scientifically possible in 2023. And number 3, it has to break even in X months, and X should be 36. What would you do? You will not be doing the stuff you are doing.
Right.
Okay? And my basic belief is, why are you doing what you're doing? Because there's some company out there who's figuring it out. And the other thing is, try to pay attention, not to just all the big marketing mucks, because the future and all your opportunities and risks will come from outside your category.
The sludge.
The sludge. Just like in automobiles, the stupid question wasn't about hardware or software or automobiles. It was, maybe the future is software, electric, or maybe it's just mobility. And all the wealth creation came from Tesla and Uber.
Right.
And it happens category after category, and that's one thing I do get to go to boardrooms.
Yep.
And I say, all of you clowns are looking at each other. It's the most incestuous big thing you have, and incest only gives rise to bastard ideas.
There we go. That's almost by definition. Rashad, you do everything in 3s, so you're writing your second book. What's your third book going to be about?
My third book, if GPT does not write it for me, or something doesn't write it for me, my third book is really going to be about the part that I found the most senior people, because I get feedback, thank you, from people who read me. I get every week feedback. The most senior people are forwarding the sections in my, if you go to my website and just add /100, you'll see this entire page. And at the bottom, it's the last 2 sections, which is about personal growth and wisdom, right?
Oh,
and
something we could all do with more.
And I think what people are struggling with is like what's the point of it all, right? And I find the more senior people are struggling with it more, and they send it to their kids.
Oh.
So their whole stuff is, read this clown, right? But it's a book that I haven't yet become aged enough to convince a publisher that I should write.
Okay. Well, I think we can.
Seasoned enough, I guess.
We can all sign up for that one when it comes out. In music, if I were to say to you, Beyonce or Prince, one word names that you, just based on the quality and the quality of their work, you just know exactly to whom you're referring. Ladies and gentlemen, Rashad.
Thank you.